Okay, so it's 7 right now, so I think I'm just gonna go ahead and start. Um, my name is Dr. Toszi. That's all I'm gonna go by right now. So the first hour is mostly gonna be about sketching, and I'm going to try to listen to your guys' ideas, or whatever suggestions you want. My experience with art and drawing anime has basically been about 6 years, so I'm going to go right ahead and say, please don't hate me for not being straight up pro. I'll be covering both body types, female and male. The one of the things that I advise the most is to start with the female frame and then go to the male frame. I'm gonna have to ask a PK about that. These are the two body types that I started with yesterday, and yes, it's okay to hate. I did these last night. They took me somewhere around the area of 5 to 10 minutes. And you can actually see why I use blue right here. I have no idea if you can see if I'm zooming in or not, but I'm just gonna zoom in to start with the female frame. So the female frame and the male frame are basically the exact same thing with only a few minor differences. You wouldn't see that at first, but I'll show you as we go along. Okay, well that gets rid of one problem then. So as you can see right here, you can see some of the guidelines that I use for the female and male frames. And I'm going to point some of these out to you in red. That's all right. I'll just be showing you the basics anyway. The part that I just highlighted right there in red is the head, of course, and that's usually one of the best places to start. But if you look right here, all right, this is the basic frame that I start with the very minute I even decide to start drawing. All right, so if you followed that, or if you're just coming in, that frame was there right from the beginning. All I did was basically highlight it out for you guys. What I've basically learned to do from lots of art classes is to just draw the shape right as soon as I was seeing it. So there you go. There's the final cheat point. That's my wireframe. Now, I used to measure a lot by heads tall, and I still do sometimes, but it's not really a thing that I worried about anymore. I mostly go by instinct. If we look at how many heads tall she is, we're basically looking at approximately somewhere in the area of 7 to 9 or 8.5 heads tall. That's okay. That's the basic proportions for comics. And this one is actually a little shorter than the girl that I uploaded the on Otaku Pride. So let's start with some beginning stuff. Even though I have the pose at an angle here, you can kind of get the area of the proportions. So you can kind of see that if she were standing head on, she'd have the head basically right between where the arm sockets would be. And right there you can actually see the middle line, which is basically where your elbow should be. That middle line is a very easy to remember and very good frame of reference for drawing your arms. Hands still suck. Now, I'm saying this just now, but the female frame, of course, is different but similar to the male frame. The male frame, the head actually sits a little bit higher than, or a little bit more in between the shoulders than on the female frame. You see that? The male frame takes up just a little bit more shoulder space, which is obvious. Now, the thing that everybody likes, the thing that basically separates an easily identifiable female frame to a male frame is this part. That. Hips are where even skeletons are identified by being male or female. You can see my male guidelines. The male's waist and hip bones are actually a lot straighter than on the female. The chest was made with a more boxy barrel than the female ones, which was done with almost a straight circle. But this area that I'm going to talk about right here, the waist, this is the area that a lot of people seem to get wrong when starting to draw out. Eyes have a curve right there too. In fact, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize or haven't learned yet is that female waists are more exaggerated not because they have a slimmer waist, but more because their hip bones stick out more. That area that I'm pointing to, you can actually see this if you ever go to a exhibition of bodies or an autopsy, which I did. Uh, the skin stretches over your bones, and the female's jutting hip bone makes the stretch look exaggerated. The hip bone for men is not as exaggerated, but it does stretch out. And it's very easy to feel where your hip bones are, so you can kind of make the estimate yourself, even if you want to, about where the bone and the curvature lies. Now, I realize I'm not going in order, or probably any conventional order, but I'm trying to tackle the hardest parts of the body first, if you guys understand that. In other words, I'm starting with the thighs next. Definitely something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with, and I struggle with a lot too, especially when people seem to have trouble where to actually put the legs. It'd be very easy to put the thighs as just a wraparound from my wireframe. What I actually did was doing something like this. So if you noticed, I did start with a straight on edge from the hip to the knee, and then went down. Now, I don't actually draw like that. This is what's happening mentally. So I highlighted it more in red, but you can actually see the muscles of the upper thigh stick out a lot more than on the bottom near the knee. And because the knee sticks out, we also have a good reference of where to cut the legs in half, basically. Now, in real life, the knee doesn't stick out that awesome, but what helps, especially in anime and manga art, is that we exaggerate some of these things. Notice my knee kind of looks like a slope right there, and that's okay because that's what helps give it the cutoff point. It's part of my style too, but it doesn't hurt to exaggerate bodies in anime. Now, the lower leg is another area that I see a lot of people struggle with, and there's actually a very easy formula to follow that's sketched out right there on making the leg. Okay, so I hope you all saw that. If not, tell me to do it again. There is a I what I did was basically take the base of the knee and took it down to the ankle. Anime and manga have that much of a difference. One is simply I only refer to them separately just because of the medium, but they mostly use the same style. Now, continuing back on the knee, on the lower leg, you can see that right as so that would basically be called the deer leg, and you see that a lot. But what gives it a little bit more sense of realism, whoops, Okay, so sorry if the audio is skipping out. I think I'm just pressing some things wrong. Yep, that deer leg. Now, there's that actual muscle that you can feel that's right over your bones. Roughly, the muscle looks like this. Very roughly. And what I'm getting at is that the two muscles are around your bone. So if you think of that deer leg as part of the muscle, see almost just exactly how the leg is built. And that's what gives the lower leg its shape. Remember, both muscles go around the back of the leg. Now, when drawing the ankle, the leg actually has another easy tip to remember. That line lets you know which way the bones go. And the bones on both legs basically go inwards. Again, that's exaggerated for anime and manga style, but that's basically true in real life. Now, the leg I drew on the other one, the side leg, that one is also has some differences that you can see. So we got the pipe again, the femur. There are a lot more muscles than you would think on the leg. That is the reason why the thigh gets such a big shape. So if we remember that there are that many muscles, that's why if you go watch Dragon Ball Z, their muscles are basically lines everywhere, all over their body. But that doesn't tend to be sexy in females. Well, it could. For this girl, what I basically just did was drew over the muscles. So you can see it's basically like putting a sack over something. Which really is what skin does to our bodies. And right there, I exaggerated the knee. Now, from behind, the knee actually has a very slight curvature. Because of the two veins that are on the back of it. And here you can actually see the muscles that I was talking about earlier that come from the knee all the way down to the ankle. So you can easily see right there from looking at the muscle, we're just gonna envelop it, and there you have the leg. See, there you go. Now I'm going to go straight onto another area that I see that seems to be a big problem among people, especially people like me. Neck. Now, for the longest time, I spent having troubles with the neck because I would think of it too much like a coat hanger, which you can think of it as, but not as much as probably what I was thinking. To begin with, your neck, especially in toned or skinny people, is very much straight. True, it has a bit curved downwards and upwards, but for the most part, it's better to just think of it as a straight appendage. Now, these two examples right here are actually a pretty good way to show off the differences on male and female necks. The female neck is slender and almost directly under the face. The male neck, it tends to be bulkier and can almost take up the whole of the face. For example, you see, even from the front view, the neck is easily identifiable in a male character, even a slender one. And the muscles of the neck, which I'll get to more in depth in a second, can be either over to signify a more muscled frame or under, more akin to the female frame, and you'll have a more androgynous looking person. You can kind of figure this out right there. The bulkier ones is more for a muscled person, while the more flat looking muscle is more for an androgynous man. But just knowing how to draw the neck won't help if you don't know how to connect it. The neck connects basically to the back of the arm sockets in a real life skeleton. Something like that. The muscle wraps around all the way to the back. So you can do the same thing for the drawing in anime and manga. There is this special muscle that I took for granted until I actually started paying more attention to it, basically. And it's that football-shaped looking muscle. It's very, very important, especially what I've noticed for comics. Now, this muscle actually fits over the next muscle and also creates a great connecting point from the base of the neck to the arms. It's also from the front where the neck bone comes out. You can see right there where I drew out where it came out from. And it works the same no matter what, all that changes will be muscle growth. Even guys have it, and guys will actually tend to have it a little bit bulkier. In fact, many shows and many armor in real life uses these kind of muscles as their base. And just like them, we can actually use those same muscles to go straight into the arm muscles. Now, the arm bones and muscles are not that different from the thigh bones and the whole leg muscle in general. In females, the muscle definition tends to not be as exaggerated in males, but there's a reason that it's not a straight stick and it's more rounded. Right where I drew the circle is a muscle that's basically your bicep. And because of that muscle and a few smaller other ones are why you want to draw any arm at least a little bit rounded. And the elbow will give us basically the same kind of problem or work that the knee did. Biceps, upper arm, triceps, lower arm. Tip to remember. That circle that I just drew on the lower arm is where approximately you'll find the triceps muscles. Well, that's true. That's how I've come to think of them in actually drawing, though. And you're right. I actually have an anatomy chart right on my wall. But it's easy to separate them into other arms because it'll be easier to remember why you're going to draw muscles. Also, yes. Right there. Not BSing you, I kinda did forget that. And I'm looking at my anatomy chart right here, and yes, you're right. But it is the way that I've basically thought of it, and it helps to create that curve on the lower arm. And those curves on the lower arm are what help give it a separation for so that it doesn't look like just a bunch of two tubes that are together. Oh yeah, this mess of lines is really sexy, eh? Now, I hope you can notice that I actually did another small bump, just like I did with the knee, on the elbow. Which, if you can just walk over to a mirror, you'll notice, of course, that your elbow sticks out. Unfortunately, my anatomy chart is kind of looking away from me, so yeah. I'll tell you the exact bones and muscles that do that. So, if you saw that curve I just did on the right arm, that's basically the muscles and the bunching that I'm talking about. You see what I just drew there? That's a very rough approximation of an arm. And just going back to that sack theory, you can think of that when you flex it or curve it, this will happen. Thank you. So you can kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. That the sack and the bone will basically create a mesh and a flex just automatically. And you can kind of figure out how the whole arm is going to go just from this point. can see the same thing in the guy's arm, and the guy's arm I just drew just slightly more muscular than the girl's. See it? The torso, the abdomen, basically the base of the whole body. Now, let me just get another layer so I can show you probably the one of the other most important parts, probably the most important part for most people. So I mentioned before that my wireframe, and that you can see before, uses circles and squares where the chest and the hips are suggested. I'm redrawing this wireframe just so you can kind of get the idea again. Now, these are good jumping off points because what we basically did with the circles on the torso were create the chest and the hip bones. The chest and the hip bones give probably the most definition to your body type. You can see right there the ribs and the hip bones. Now, for the guy, what I basically did was incorporate his muscles to give him a more boxy frame and a more straight frame, which you'll see the big contrast when I draw on the female frame. And again, when I was talking about the curves earlier, you will want to have curves where, especially at two certain parts. The navel and the top of the hip bone. These two parts basically give the curve definition to the whole body. Now, there isn't really much that I can touch upon here because these muscles tend to be static just depending on how much you work them out. How much, of course, belly fat you have. So what I'm going to go over instead are the more commonly seen muscles, especially in manga. Right there on guys, we have the pecs, which are, what every shonen manga has on their main character, usually. Now, those two muscles rest right on top of your rib cage, and they are separated in two, something that a few anime and manga artists don't seem to get quite right. The usual mistake is to think of it as a single muscle and then just draw a line in the middle. They actually more like are this. Guy boobs. Now, what actually happens, especially when you exercise, is that you inflate them. Really just like a balloon. And they actually bunch up at these 2 points. So, those points that you see right there, that's what you can actually see in Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball Z anytime somebody goes maximum bulk. So if you ever wondered why those lines were there, now you know. Another common muscle area that is the basically the washboard abs. This is my first day teaching. Now, those two lines are basically the gist of the washboard abs. They are separated into two sections. I'm actually going to say I don't know the exact number of them, as I don't draw them a lot. The number I went for was more around 4 to 6. Kind of see right there that in the highlights that that's what I posted. Well, hell, I got it right. Now, I don't draw overly muscled guys, and for androgynous guys, these muscles tend to only be suggested. But there are muscles that are right underneath the pecs, which connect almost all the way over to the washboard. I did not define them here, but know that they are there, and that's also what helps contribute to a guy's bulkiness. That's the idea of how they look. They are basically serrated edges. And so, now to give you a big contrast, I'm going to go right over to the female frame and show you some of the differences. So, just like the guy, you can see that I started with the wireframe and put the two circles where the rib cage and the hip bone would be. Right off the bat, you can kind of notice that I made the female's hip bones rounder compared to the male hip bones, and that's something I always do. And honestly, it doesn't do anything practically, it's more just a mental reminder to keep you thinking in the female frame sort of view. For the person who requested clothes. Now, one thing you'll probably notice is that the rib cage I drew is a little bit smaller and probably a little more rounded than males. At this point, it's mostly instinct for me, but it is something that you'll want to keep in mind if you're still a beginner. Now, let's get on to probably, of course, the biggest difference in a male and female anatomy, which is the breast. Now, they are actually not that different from the male pecs in that they're a piece of anatomy, basically, that are sitting on top of the rib cage. I'm not going to go into specifics because there's way too many muscles and different kind of stuff that go on there, also known as girl boobs. So you can kind of imagine that part of the reason that they're going to stick out more is that they are already sitting on top of something else. So it is basically muscleception. They are 1 over 1 over 1. Now, right there, what I'm showing you is something that you probably have to understand when actually drawing them. And in fact, this was actually touched in Negima. Kufei, if you know that character, she was a martial artist in the manga. And it was actually pointed out that her chest was almost artificially extended because she did so much training that her muscles on her pecs actually were more inflated than her breasts. And we're back. Now, I'm probably the first thing you're going to notice is that I like to zoom in a lot and zoom out a lot. So, continuing where we were earlier, we were finishing on the breast, right? Okay. The easiest way to picture drawing them is something like this. Yeah, it looks weird. It's something you have to just picture. Now, fun fact, that thing I actually drew was what a lot of the old artists, old Renaissance artists had as their reference. Basically took a comma shape and pasted it on the chest. Now, due to the fact that that is just a bunch of varying sizes, one thing that you can also practice with is doing something like this. Now, you see what happened right there was I basically did it just in the same way you would a pad. Those kind of pads, actually, you can probably even find in JCPenney's or something like that. Having trouble visualizing any of this, just think of it like stitching in that pattern, going from each of the cardinal directions. And here's a really easy tip to remember for drawing them in manga style. Start from the breastbone and do this. Did you all see those lines? Well, hopefully you did, but let me X out the tips of them. What happens there is that you basically end up right in the center of them, and you can basically adjust that tip. So if we adjust something like the curve, you can end up with a smaller chest. And of course, remember that they are basically at an angle. Let me show you a top view. That right there is the mental image you want to have when you're drawing them, and this mostly applies when there's no physics on them. Other than that, as I was talking earlier, the female body has all the same muscles that males have. So yes, girls have the pectoral muscles, the washboard abs, and that serrated edge that I can't remember at the moment. Which which is a pretty good transition right now for getting from the chest to the hips. If we want to remember all the way back when we started that whole sack analogy, I'm sorry, let me address this. Wendy, when I said no physics, I meant no force. For example, stick figure. If she takes a sudden turn, then her breasts with no support or anything will probably swing in the direction that they go in. Joy Feather, you don't need to learn any medical physics, but you'll probably have to learn the finer points of anatomy. For example, learning just where these muscles are, or trying or remembering where they are, is extremely useful and will probably come up. The example that I was using earlier about Akira Toriyama with Dragon Ball Z, when his characters bulk out, they look believable because his muscles are all correct. Part anyway. Now, if we're getting back to connecting that sack analogy, you can actually see the 2 points that I was talking about earlier. We have the navel, where generally the body will be cut in half, and the top of the hip bone. And that's where you get the feminine curve. Which also helps to become the top of the thighs. And there is actually a small band of muscle that is more pronounced in females right here. That's the shape of it. It's not that pronounced, but if you can remember that there's something like that there, it'll also help. And there's also a females have their belly stick out just a little bit more than you think, which is where you get that curve right there. Yep. In fact, most bikinis and most clothing in general takes their ideas from where the muscles are, which will become really useful when you're trying to clothe your character. we go back to the guy, you can see this exact same thing. And in fact, a lot of Indian art will actually exaggerate that waistband a lot more in both male and females. So you can kind of get the idea. Show you some quick sketches that I did using this whole anatomy idea. Now, for all of these sketches, I just used the exact same wireframe model and same idea of remembering where the muscles are as I just showed you. Now, I want to say that I want to do an in-depth tutorial on the hands and feet at a later date, possibly next week. Now, yeah, hands and feet, I'm just going to do a whole thing just about them, probably next week. I admit I'm not good at either of them as much as other masters, but I'll certainly do my best for you guys. Now, since it's 8, what I want to get into now is the second half that I was talking about, which is the coloring. And for coloring, I actually have a model already prepared for you. Now, I did this sketch on Thursday, and that's when I finished it. And this is what I'm going to use to teach you guys coloring. Let me show you the sketch from where I did this. Okay, I guess I'll do an inking class too one day. Uh, Something I actually want to mention, I actually use the exact same pen for both sketching and inking, which is what I'm doing right now. Let me see if you guys can see my pen settings. Okay, so I'm going to share that pen after this, but you can kind of get the idea of it. As I said, I use that same pen for sketching and inking. And right there, a lot earlier, somebody asked why I still use blue, and that's where you can see why I still use it. I start with a very light blue, and as I start getting confident in the shape, I start making the blue darker. Okay, so now we're going to get straight onto the coloring part. Now, first thing to start on with your line art is to put it on a multiply layer. For anyone who doesn't know what a multiply layer is, what it basically does is that it turns your whites transparent and your blacks as black as they can. That's the formal thing that I've seen over the years. What it really helps in, of course, is just keeping your lines workable. Oh yeah, and this is to Hammy. Uh, yeah, you can use red, you can use blue. You can use any color you want. And of course, that is just my sketching style. It's not something you have to copy directly. If you can see my layer organizations, you see that I actually have one layer above the line art. And just for organization's sake, I take the sketch layer and just put it on the bottom. So, let's start with the easiest part to color, which is the skin. There's no rule for what color skin you want to use, but I typically use 4 brushes in coloring, and probably just those 4. This brush that you see right here is just customized from the hard brush. Then I just use the hard brush itself. The default soft brush, and a customized soft brush. Now, the best way to begin in anime and manga is to start with a flat color, which is this. Now, in my style of coloring, I basically just cover all I want to cover. For easy reference, I'm going to put the colors right here, right next, so you can see what colors I'm using. It's good to learn to stay inside the lines, but I let myself go a little bit more with digital programs. However, if you ever want to try drawing live with coloring pencils, that's very, very good training. So, one of the cornerstones of anime color is contrast. And when I'm talking about contrast, I'm talking about having colors that are very far away from each other. Maybe not on the color scale, but just that they are easily recognizable right up next to each other. Okay, so for skin, I'm going to start with just a soft color, just to give it some tone. It is the exact same shadow that I'll be using. I turned it on just so I'd have less to clean up on after. Wait, is this still in full or short screen? Okay, second. Alright, so you can kind of see how I started the tones. Now, after going over it with the same tone as a spray paint, what I'm going to do is take that first customized brush and just do the shadows. Now, the great thing about these online programs, especially like Sketch Club, is the ability to switch the size very quickly. Now, this is probably where learning anatomy comes the best. Because once you know what sticks out and what's over something, you can kind of easily tell where the shadows are going to fall. Now, for any sort of drawing, you want to zoom in and zoom out. Yeah, that's my mic. And you're right, Arrow. The chiaroscuro lesson from Dave is something you'll definitely want to see if you want to learn about shadows. In fact, because anime and manga are more exaggerated forms, our shadows are basically just taking realistic shadows to the logical extreme. Yep, that part right there, it it's one of the good things about knowing anatomy because you can know how to zoom in some perspective parts. In fact, I could have zoomed the hand just up and given you more of an impact, but this way looks a little bit more realistic. Well, as realistic as a fox girl can get, anyway. Now, I shared this same brush that I'm using a while ago, but I think I might have changed it a little bit, so I'm going to just share this one as a second version of the brush. This custom brush, what I did basically is that if I go slow, it turns into a hard brush. If I go quick, it turns into a soft brush. Mika, I'm using that brush. Now, I hope you can kind of see how the shadows are coming together. I'm just using the regular Wacom stylus. All the pressure is just coming from my brush and how I use it. No shame in using the undo button. Yep, the undo button is magical. But there is a few artists that don't use it at all. I'm going to, I guess, shameless advert, but there is one artist that I follow on YouTube called Belittler. He usually prefers to just erase any part that he messes up and redo it. A bit hardcore. So here's where I'm going to start to get into some special effects for this. So you see, I'm using just switched to a darker shade, and this shade is what's going to be the darkest darks for this. In other words, this is another way that anime and manga derived from the original chiaroscuro of the Renaissance. Um, you can use probably as much as many colors as you want to control. This is keep it simple, stupid. But anime and manga use a very, very strict rule of kiss. And what that means is that when you start using too many colors and too many contrasts in anime and manga, without knowing how to control them, you will probably end up with something looking muddy. If you want to see a bad example of using colors and the like, go check out a Psychic Academy's manga. Their covers were hand drawn by the artist, and he didn't have a very good understanding of using color. Something that he admits now and has improved a lot on his new manga. Got a question, buddy? Here's something that I want to point out if anybody's noticing. The color isn't actually filled in for my shading. And in fact, that happens to a lot more artists than you think. The fact is that what's important is the internal, the whole look from start to finish for the audience, which is about this zoomed out view. What this means is that even rushing, as long as you're properly controlling the colors, even if you don't manage to fill in everything, it can still look like a good piece. No, at the moment I'm not blurring any shading. Can, and I prefer to actually smudge it. But the only thing that's creating this is my same brush, creating little gradients and going to from a soft to a hard brush. Said, I'll be sharing this same brush that I'm using, just so you guys can try it out. But no, I haven't used any blurring or shading if you've noticed. Here's a little trick for this kind of style. I'm going to take my airbrush and if you'll notice, that's how I've done the nose. And now if we want to add some little blushing, there you go. Sorry if you guys' sound isn't working. Maybe it's just my cover or something. Okay, so this last part on the skin is just adding reds. And those reds, I mean, putting where the skin touches the bone the closest. This is another thing about anatomy that you probably, if you haven't studied, might not know about. It's very obvious though. If the skin is touching the bone very closely, for example, like on your knuckles, it'll look more reddish, and that's because the whole blood, the whole skin, everything that's under that is coming through a lot more than in other places where the skin isn't as close to the bone. If you remember to put in this red, it'll give a better effect to your drawings. See what a difference it made? And now I'm going to show you why I used that top layer. I'm going to take the whitest whites and so far I've just used the one layer for the skin. And so you can see what I did with the highlights right there. Highlights and shadows are basically what give your color expression, and just like every part of the drawing, you have to know how to control them and give them emotion. Yes, let me show you my layers so you can see them. So the very top layer is highlights, which is over the line art. The second one after that is the line art itself on a multiply layer. And the one underneath that is the skin layer where I've done everything right now. Sorry, emotion, Wendy. So you can see that I actually did everything on one layer. Let me turn off the other layers and you can see it. Yep, under the line work. And again, it's on a multiply layer. Now, we only have a few minutes, so I want to cover what is probably one of the more important parts, which is coloring the eye. For the eye, I start with both the white and the actual eye color. Now, did everybody see what color I'm actually using for the white of the eye? Okay, Moonchild got it right. I just basically went to the very white, and then slid over to blue, and then slid over a little more into blue. So it's very bright, but it still looks white. Exactly, Wendy. Okay, so what do you guys want her eye color to be? Well, looks like purple wins. Now, let me show you the trick to how I draw the eyes. And now I'm just going to switch over and do the highlights. Oh, whoops! Forgot one part. Shadow on the eyes. So for the eyes, you actually want to just stay with one color so that it doesn't distract from the actual eye color. Okay, and there you can see the eyes. Not always, but it's a good general rule for most of the drawing. And it is the rule that I use, particularly myself, just because that's the way I like it. Yes, the whites I did are pure white. Those are highlights. And those were done on the highlight layer. Yeah, I totally want a name layer option. For anime and manga, the pupils can be implied or distinct, whichever works. In fact, one of the general divides is that shonen manga or men's manga, action manga have the pupils implied, and shoujo manga and josei manga, which are more for women, uh, actually don't color in the pupils much. Now, what I'm going to do is probably very boring, but it's something that you'll have to put up with, and it's erasing the whole skin just to make it work. And with the new erase option that we got with the new update, it's actually very good for me who's used to customizing his eraser. For my eraser, I'm just using the exact same brush I was just using, and I just made it an eraser. I actually know a little bit about vector erase, but I'm old school and I just erase. Yeah, I have nothing against if you want to use new ones or if you know better tricks. I want you to think of this class more as just a collection of tips to help you and to improve your own styles. Now, watching me erase like this is probably gonna is fulfilling two things. One, you're kind of figuring out if you want to do old school erase or if you just want to learn the new vector erase. I don't really care. And you can kind of see how long it usually takes to get to this point in coloring. In fact, what usually takes the longest for me is just getting the sketch right and the line art done. Okay, so we're kind of getting late into this, and let me finish up with some stuff that I want to get out. As you can see there, it actually kind of starts to look pretty good once you have the erase done and once you have everything inside the colors. And you can kind of see the influence of a multiply layer when you're coloring right here. Let me zoom in. You can kind of see the gray that is melding with the shading, and that is all a result of mostly the multiply layer. Now, I want to do close later on as well. And one of the things that I want to touch on before we go is the line art itself. I'll do this more when we actually do the inking class, but if I want you to notice that the line art has to have its own emotion as well. You'll notice that I used a lot thicker lines when I was doing the head and the hair and everything that had to do with the face, more than I did on the body. No, Moonchild, I only used the one normal layer just to do the whole skin. Now, if you guys can notice right here, the belt, I darkened the lines right where the belt would hit at its edges, and that kind of hints a little more at giving it a 3D feel, if you can feel it. Okay, let me show you guys my pen again, so you can see it. I'll be sharing this, but for anybody who was late or didn't see it, I'm gonna redo it. Okay, so all those weird random scribbles are done with the same pen, and that is my custom pen, which I will be sharing later. Very. Now, when I was talking about pen lines having impact, I actually want you to look at the hand right here. If you'll notice, I made a lot of the lines around the hand very thin, or just not as thin as the hand itself. And what that does is that it just helps you have the hand be a more impact and make you think that it's right in front of everything. Exactly. And Black Pun, I actually want to suggest that for me personally, I didn't like the simplify thing. Maybe I'm just not used to it. What I usually actually do is just sketch just like how I do and actually use a very small eraser sometimes. Or I'll just undo. So, I know we're 3 minutes under, but how about we just take this last time just if you guys have any suggestions or want to see anything else for me to do right now? This, the fox girl will be finished later. Oh, by the way, what did you guys say her name was? That works. Tsune Hime. Yeah, when I do the inking thing, I'm probably also going to go over flow so that you guys can maybe learn if you don't know to put action in your drawings. Believe me, action makes the drawing look a lot better. 7 years old, I played Final Fantasy VII. I decided I wanted to be a concept designer, and I spent my entire life doing it. But I actually only knew about anime and manga because I used to watch Yu-Gi-Oh! And I didn't even know that they had a Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga until I was about 18 years old. And at about 18, I think, was right when I actually found the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, and that's when I decided that's what I wanted to draw. So this is now directly 9, and I hope you enjoyed the lesson and looking forward to any other ones that are going to come. Thank you all, and good night.